Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this virtual training today. CASA advocates are honestly my favorite group of people to train. I'm not just saying that because I say that to every group of people. I actually don't. I love training CASA advocates. You guys are some of my favorite people, the biggest hearts. I've never had a bad time training with CASAs. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, genuinely, for all that you guys do for kids. It takes a lot to volunteer in the capacity that you do. So I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate you guys before we jump into it. Forgive my voice. I'm trying not to sound super stuffy, but I'm getting over a cold from this weekend. If you see me mouth breathing, that's what's going on here. So I might have to cough a little bit, might have to blow my nose, but we're going to truck on through. Love winter time. So like Zoe said, my name is Rachel Kruzik. I'm the Southern Region Prevention Specialist with Prevent Child Abuse Illinois. I cover the bottom 36 counties of Illinois. If you don't know who we are, what we do, you read our mission statement a little bit, but I'll give a little bit more information on us, but not too much, just for the sake of time. So we are a private nonprofit, started in 1990. We are funded by many sort of grants and organizations, but DCFS is our primary funder. When someone thinks of Prevent Child Abuse Illinois, or whenever I talk about Prevent Child Abuse in Illinois as my job, folks usually think that I am a DCFS advocate. And we're funded by DCFS, but we are not caseworkers. I do not do direct service anymore. However, once upon a time, a little bit about my background that I like to talk about while I do trainings is that I used to be a high school English teacher, switched careers, because that's just fun to do sometimes, I guess, and worked in the sexual assault prevention field for a while, as both a prevention specialist and an advocate in the hospitals. And then I also switched gears and did counseling for children who lived in homes with domestic violence for a while before I moved into this position. So I don't do direct service anymore. I don't work directly with kids anymore. I don't do casework anymore or counseling, but I do have that previous experience that I will most likely bring into this training and ad lib. So we are not direct service. We do primarily prevention and education, public awareness. Child Abuse Prevention Month is coming up. So if you have any Child Abuse Prevention Month initiatives in your area, very likely we are either planning it or we're a part of it somehow. We stay really busy in April. We've got our annual conference. Like we mentioned already, we have a literature distribution program. Sometimes I talk too fast, where you can order free literature through Prevent Child Abuse Illinois on our website. We have awesome parent slicks. So these, I really need to put examples in these presentations so you guys see what I'm talking about. We have these really great one-sided brochures that you can have in your offices or to give out to parents, and they're written in a way that's very accessible to parents, that talk about prevention topics of all kinds. So we have domestic violence prevention, we've got child sexual abuse prevention, we have what are ACEs, what is trauma, we have a new perinatal mood disorder slick coming out, and those are things that you can order on our website. The only thing that you need to pay for is shipping.
I will say we just ordered a bunch of those, so they're going to be available. So any advocate can stop by our office and pick up however many they want to bring the families.
I really wish whenever I was a counselor that I knew that we existed and that I could have had them too, because I think they're not only so easily accessible for parents in terms of language, but they also just look really nice. They're very well designed. So I'm glad you guys have some. It's exciting. We also have a podcast. So if you want to check out our podcast, we have a few episodes out. Yeah, you can check that out. All right. So hopping right into it, just because I was told to get you guys out of here by 7, and that is what I'm going to do. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about what is trauma, how trauma impacts brain development, understanding the importance of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and we're going to briefly discuss the impact of secondary trauma and building resilience. Very briefly, it's very brief. So what happens to us as children shapes who we become as adults, quote by Alice Miller. Just to let you guys know, this subject can be really hard to talk about. As we go over the presentation today, it's very likely that those in this virtual room have either experienced childhood trauma like this or are near and dear to someone who's experienced childhood trauma like this. And sometimes things can come up in unexpected ways for us. So, especially since we're virtual, if you need a chance to step away from the computer, go to the bathroom, just whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, we try our trainings are try to approach these topics in a way that aren't triggering, but you never know how things pop up for you. So please, please, please take care of yourself. It's late at night. I would hate for you to go to bed feeling dysregulated. Do what you need to do to take care of your body. That transitions. So, starting out, so the National Institute of Mental Health defines trauma as the experience of an event by a child that is emotionally painful or distressful, which often results in lasting mental and physical effects. Now, note, let me reread that again. It is not the event itself. So I'm gonna read this definition again. Trauma is the experience of an event by a child that is emotionally painful or distressful. So when we think of trauma, we often think of it as the thing that is happening to us, as the like the physical abuse that's happening to you, as the car accident that you're in, and those can be traumatic. But where trauma comes from is how your brain and body interprets that event. So what you're going to see throughout this training, and I'm going to give examples of this as well, is that two children can go through the same exact trauma event, but have completely different experiences of it. Whereas one kid will face this event not traumatized, the other child might face this event and have trauma come out the other end of it. So trauma is not the event itself, it is the experience of that event. There are current estimates that one in four children in the United States experience some form of maltreatment during childhood. When children witness violence between their adult caregivers or in their communities or experience abuse or neglect, they start believing that the world is an unpredictable and threatening place. Experts explain that trauma, like I said, is not the event itself, but rather a response to that stressful experience in which a person's ability to cope is dramatically undermined. And this is really powerful because when we are able to understand that trauma is not itself the experience, instead the response to the experience, we're able to change how we view trauma and how we respond to the children in our communities that are impacted by trauma. And the reason why people experience events as traumatic is because we are wired for survival. Humans are not that far evolved from our caveman days. We are working with prehistoric technology in our heads. And the world is definitely not prehistoric anymore, but the brains can't tell the difference from that. So a brain might interpret something very mundane as something extremely life-threatening. So that is where trauma happens, whenever the brain experiences an event as life-threatening. So when we're talking about exposure to trauma, it's important that we discuss the 3 E's of trauma, which is the event, the person's experience, and the effects. So starting number 1, the event. So circumstances that might include the actual or extreme threat of physical or psychological harm, for example, a natural disaster, witnessing violence, etc., or abuse or neglect on a child that impairs regular development. These events can occur as a single occurrence. This is called acute trauma, or repeatedly over time. This is called complex trauma. We will break down those 2 different types of trauma in the next slide. An acute trauma, for example, would be like car accident, weather event, like I said. And then complex trauma would be living a home where a child is being abused every day. That is those little traumas that build up over time and become embedded in a person's psyche and body. The next, number 2, is experience. The individual's experience of the event or events determines whether it was a traumatic event. So how the event is experienced can be linked to several different factors, including cultural beliefs, availability of social supports, or developmental stage of the individual. This is how 2 children from the same home can be experienced or be exposed to the same event, but it has different effects on each child because it just all depends on if the brain interprets that experience as life-threatening. The most critical component of trauma is the lasting effects of the event. So the 3rd E. Trauma is a normal response to an abnormal situation. So a lot of my folks, either my friends who have been through traumatic experiences, or my clients, or the people I would advocate for in the hospital after sexual assault, they would feel so abnormal. They felt so strange. They felt like, I'm so weird. I'm not like everyone else. I have all these triggers. I'm so dysregulated emotionally. I'm so abnormal. Trauma is a normal experience to an abnormal event. These people are acting normally. It is how a body and brain react to trauma. So even though the person that you're helping might feel abnormal and say, I'm so strange, I'm not like other people, be sure that you're reassuring these kids that what you're reacting to is normal. You're reacting exactly how a brain and body should react in this situation. And now, how do we work with the brain and body in a natural way to where you're not dysregulated anymore, to where you're not triggered anymore, things like that. So looping back to effects, these effects might be immediate or they might be delayed. The duration of the effects can also be short term or have a lasting impact on the individual. This is when survival mode will kick in, which, like I said, is a normal response when we feel threatened. Yeah. All right, so the types of trauma, like I said, acute trauma is a single incident one. Um, there's usually no lasting impact on development. You might have lasting impact, such as like maybe someone gets into a fender bender car accident as a child and they suffer no physical injuries. They're probably not going to have any lasting effect on their development, on their brain development, on their body development, but they still, might have flashbacks about that incident. They might still feel a little bit afraid of driving in a car, but it won't impact their cognitive functioning. They might not have trouble in school long term because of this. They might not have trouble regulating their emotions long term because of this. Probably right in after the moment, but long term, you usually see really good recovery. Treatment includes immediate support, removal from the traumatic situation, or medication. However, complex trauma is different. This is the exposure to prolonged trauma, daily trauma, over and over and over again. This often begins in early childhood. It occurs within the primary caregiving system. So whoever is this child's primary caregivers, both inside the immediate home and outside. And treatment includes long-term mental health services and often medication. The effects of acute trauma include pain, confusion, dissociation, maybe a lack of self-care, insomnia, loss of focus. This is where you get like your post-car accident PTSDs, post tornado or weather event PTSD, things like that. However, complex trauma, let me move these boxes over so I can see. You might have difficulty with attachment relationships. See, this is where this impacts brain development and social development. Whereas acute trauma, let me go back. You're going to get these short-term effects. Complex trauma, you're going to get difficulty with forming attachments with relationships, forming friendships, forming romantic relationships, trouble with forming relationships with your coworkers or your community. Might have physical health or dysregulation of physical health. This is where you get stomach problems. This is where you get cognitive functioning problems. Might have difficulties managing emotion. Maybe you've never developed emotional coping skills. Might dissociate often or have behavioral problems, and then often has a diminished self-concept and self-worth, which is very vital when promoting emotional well-being within yourself and connecting with your community. Look over my notes. So some symptoms that we can look out for that might be caused by complex trauma include nightmares, intrusive memories, or even intrusive thoughts. So sometimes kiddos can have intrusive memories of the event itself, or they might have intrusive thoughts of things that have never happened. Some kiddos can develop OCD in this situation. Things like that is worried that they're going to hurt themselves, worried that they're going to hurt their loved ones, worried they're going to hurt their pets, worried that their house is going to catch fire, and worry about everything. So not only just intrusive memories, but intrusive thoughts as well. They might have an increased startle response, I have it. I have personal experience with childhood trauma and things like that. I share my story often in these trainings. Might not get into it too much today for the sake of time. That's why I'm so passionate about this topic. But I remember when I was working in an office, uh, I have a very increased startle response. It's very easy to spook me. And my coworkers would know that they would have to announce themselves if they were coming in from another room, because it doesn't matter if they just floated in the most peaceful way possible. If I turned around and they were walking in the door, I would be jumping 10 feet off the ground. So in our office, we knew if we were going to go into a room where Rachel's in, we have to say, "Hey, I'm coming in here. Don't jump." Um, and that was very nice of them to accommodate me like that. So you might have an increased startle response. You also might have a decreased startle response. There are some kiddos who they learn to dissociate, to shut off, and they won't respond even if you throw something at them, because they just learn to shut those responses down to protect themselves. They might have shame. They might have panic attacks or be overwhelmed emotionally. Often have chronic pain. So things like headaches, stomach aches. They might have eating disorders. You see a kiddo with an eating disorder, that's definitely a reason to keep your ears perked up. They might deal with substance abuse or self-destructive behaviors. They might have little to no memories. Very common with kiddos with complex trauma is that they can't remember their childhood very well. I know a lot of my kids that I worked with, they would either do two things. They would either remember only the bad things of their childhood, the extreme acute moments of abuse, and nothing else, none of the happy stuff. Or there were kids that dissociated so much that they only remembered the far and few between happy moments, but had very little memory of anything else that went on in their childhood. So memory issues are common. They might be super hyper vigilant, always on their toes, always ready for danger. They might have decreased concentration, have trouble with concentrating in tasks, might have trouble in school, things like that. So many things that can come from childhood trauma, from complex trauma. Okay, so this is a little video that we show in almost every training. It's called the Brain Builders video, and it talks about how trauma affects the development of a child's brain. It's a great representation of how brains are built in childhood and what children need for healthy brain development, and what happens when a young brain is exposed to ongoing traumatic stress. So give me just a second, because I need to share my sound. Let me know if you can hear this when it gets started, or if you cannot, I guess. If you say nothing, I'm assuming you're hearing it.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious, ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for a positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
It's such a good little video. Let me skip it so that doesn't play again. We really like that video just because it's so brief and really discusses the importance of different aspects when it comes to building healthy brains. Like that serve and return concept is so important for kiddos, especially at younger ages. The brain learns by that back and forth, almost like a tennis match of interactions between positive adults. And so if you get a kiddo who gets mostly negative returns when they serve, or when they serve, they get no return at all due to emotional neglect, that can really impact the brain in a huge way. It impacts how a child learns not only to see themselves, but the world around them. And it's a template for how they interact with other people as well. I also like how it talked about the air traffic control system. Kiddos who experience complex childhood trauma will often present symptoms very similar to ADHD, because in ADHD, it is a dopamine regulation issue that causes difficulties in executive functioning, so that prefrontal cortex functioning that allows you to do your daily tasks. So remembering to set your alarms, to brush your teeth, to get dressed, task planning. When a kid goes through complex trauma, that prefrontal cortex is also impacted because that's where all your planning happens. That's your big brain here in the front. The child, the brain goes, I don't need to develop this part of my brain. I don't need to learn how to get dressed and brush my teeth. I need to learn how to survive. The survival part of your brain is your hindbrain in the very back, right where it connects to your spinal cord. And that is what the body will focus on, because that is where all of your survival instincts kick in. So whenever you go into fight or flight mode, when you get triggered, when you get angry, when you get scared, that is the part of your brain that switches on. So that's why we see kids with childhood trauma exhibit similar, symptoms as ADHD, because for both kiddos, the ADHD kiddo and the kiddo who's been through complex trauma, they're having difficulties with the executive functioning part of their brain. So a little bit of brain science talk before we get to the next one. So just like the video we just watched, this picture demonstrates the thought process of a healthy brain. This is commonly how we all process information, or should process information. A situation happens, we observe, we make an interpretation, like, well, that person was maybe rude to me because they just had a bad day. They're having a bad day, has nothing to do with me. And then we think about that information. And maybe we come up with some different options for how to respond and how to act. So we could ask that person, what's wrong? Offer support. Move you guys' boxes around. So it's just a very easy, organized highway. We observe, the input comes in, we interpret the input, we process it in our brain, pick out the different options of what to do, we make a plan, and we act. If only in a perfect world, that's how all of our brains would work. In a perfect world. I feel like this is how my brain works. Maybe there's like a few more potholes, some detours under construction all the time. So when a brain has been exposed to repeated trauma, the brain learns over time that it does not have time to evaluate. You can't evaluate, you can't plan whenever you are experiencing something that puts you into survival mode. In order to stay safe, they need to act quickly. For children who've been exposed to trauma, this is often referred to as being in a constant, never-ending fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. I'll talk about fawning in a second. This is because important connections in their brain were not made during their early childhood years. Maybe people did not show them how to interpret information correctly, how to plan, how to execute the plan. So they're not able to process and identify situations and responses to those situations. This type of response becomes their automatic response. They simply do not have the ability to determine if a situation is life-threatening, because their brains tell them this is the normal response when they feel unsafe or out of control in every situation. So as you see, moving my boxes over again. Oh, did I freeze? Okay, I'm back. I froze briefly. You see, we have observe, we're observing the world around us, we're interpreting the world around us, and then our brains goes, oh my God, danger, danger, everything is dangerous, everything's scary. And so instead of this nice highway is all blocked off under construction, just like I-57 in Illinois all the time. You don't process, you don't evaluate, you don't plan, you just react. So you observe, you interpret, you react, you act. It is the expressway past all of that good planning that we do that keeps us calm, that keeps us regulated, that keeps us going from one moment to the next. These kiddos are always on this express route to survival mode. Before I go on, I briefly mentioned, so we've heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response. I'm going to bounce this back to you guys real quick. What do you guys think is the fawn response, that fourth F I talked about? If you don't want to say it out loud, you can put it in the chat. See if I know what the fawn response is. F-A-W-N, like a baby deer. So maybe that's not how you spell fawn. I should know this as an English teacher. Hold on. That is how you spell like fawning. But now I'm like, is baby deer spelled F-A-U-N? No, it's right. That's right. Any ideas? Okay, then we're gonna learn about it. Okay, so the fawn response is you guys have all heard fight, flight, or freeze, right? Let me get yes. Okay, so fawn is the fourth F in the trauma response. Fawning is when we're gonna give an example, a child tries to please their abuser. So this happens also in domestic violence relationships too, between two adults. Anyone can do the fawn response. The fawn response is when you are trying to please or appease the thing that is threatening you. So for a child, it means they know mom gets angry when the dishes aren't done. So they will immediately go and do the dishes before mom ever gets home. Maybe they hear dad slamming the cabinets. They immediately go out there and go, oh my gosh, what's wrong? How can I help you? What can I do? Can I make it better? Can I fix it? It is a very over anxious attempt to try and please the person that you are feeling threatened by. You'll see this a lot with domestic violence cases as well, where they will try and please their abuser, do everything right to make their abuser not react or explode. And so when you see instances where a child or domestic violence survivor is overly attentive and loving and doting to their abuser, that's their fawn response. It's not a response because they're actually doing this out of devotion and because they're so happy to be in that situation. It is because their body is trying to appease the abuser to make them feel safe. It is a trauma response just like any of the other ones. So you guys learned something new today. All right, so we're going to talk about how trauma can actually impact the structure of the brain, how the brain actually looks. Trauma is an injury. It can be healed. The brain is so elastic. It makes so many new connections every day. And so many new good things can be formed in the brain, and the brain can heal. However, repeated trauma does injure the brain. So this is the brain scan of two 6-year-old boys. The healthy brain on the left shows a lot of activity and firing in the temporal lobes, or the top part of the brain, where executive functioning and self-control lives. The abused brain is a 6-year-old boy who has grown up in a Romanian orphanage his entire life. And notice the top part of his brain is not even lit up, but his most active part of his brain is the bottom part up here, or the survival mode part of his brain. So when you see these two brains back to back, they look wildly different. For kiddo on the left, healthy brain, so much is happening up here. This kid can plan his meals. This kid can brush his teeth. This kid can talk to his peers. He can get dressed. He can find himself a snack. There's all this problem solving going on up here that he can do. How do you imagine the kiddo on the right, the abused brain, with no activity going on up here? How do you imagine he's going to get through his school day?
Say, like you said, any type of input that comes in, whether it's an actual, like, if it's perceived as a harm, even if it's just like a friend bumping up against him, he'll probably automatically go into that. How do I protect myself? How do I react in this, or not thinking about how he reacts, just reacting.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's exactly how it plays out. I remember whenever I was counseling, I got a teenage girl who had been living with her mom up until the point where she came to see me, and then mom kicked her out and sent her to live with her dad. So this girl had missed school for a year or two because her mom just simply didn't want to enroll her in school. They were homeless. Mom was on substances. This girl would go get substances for her mom. They often slept in cars or tents. She had a very traumatic backstory, and this is, by the time she got to me, she was a teenager and had been living like this her whole life. So you can imagine how difficult it was for her to go from this to now she's going to school every day and has a routine every day, and adults are asking her things to do. And at first, the adults were very confused by her behavior, even asking her to take out a pencil threw her into a rage. And she would yell and storm out. Whenever I met with the teachers and met with the counselor, what we pinned down was that my client learned to interpret adults making demands of her as unsafe, because every time an adult made a demand of her when she was living with her mom, something unsafe would happen. And so when a demand is made of her, her brain immediately goes from neutral situation to I need to protect myself immediately, which came out as fight, as anger for her usually. And we worked on it at the back end with counseling and helping her think about her thoughts, actually interpret, is this situation safe or unsafe? What will happen if I don't take out my pencil? What happens if I do take out my pencil? Do my teachers actually mean me harm? Things like that. And eventually, as the school year went on, that behavior got a lot better, actually very quickly, because her brain was able to interpret, oh, not every time an adult makes a demand of me, something is unsafe. That repetition of safety, safety, safety really healed something in her brain near the end of the year. So move on this way.
I was going to ask real quick, if anybody has a question, do you want them to like just ask, or can they put it in the chat and do it at the end, or?
You can do both. You can interrupt me. You can just jump right in via video or in chat. And Zoe, if you see something that seemed in chat, because I'm not always paying attention to the chat for screen purposes, if you see something that looks like time sensitive, just interrupt me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did have one question.
Go for it.
So with like the brain development showing that trauma, so have they looked into it, like say the child that you were with after going through the counseling, kind of relearning that? Can their brain like regrow those spots or like once they're
Mhm.
past that age? Okay. I didn't know
Nope,
if
the
it was
brain.
something where they would have to completely relearn like those connections or
They can, and they can relearn those connections. Now, for this brain, this is a severe example. So your most of your average kiddos that you're working with will not have a brain this severe. This child grew up in a Romanian orphanage, so he had no interaction, no touch, absolutely nothing. You'll see a little bit more activity with the kiddos that you guys are seeing, but yeah, they absolutely can regrow and relearn. Depending on how severe it is, it might not ever get to the level of, say, a kid who grew up completely healthy. But the brain is so active and reactive, even well into adulthood. You can retrain your brain and get these parts up here firing again.
it's amazing.
Yeah, it provides a lot of hope. Um, something I do these trainings and it seems like really down and depressed and dour, but I think we go on at the end of this to talk about like the brain actually repairs itself so much more quickly in connection than it does, get damage from traumatic things happening to them. So a brain can heal very quickly and rapidly if it just has one safe and stable connection with another person. And I've seen that in counseling, I've seen that in relationships. It is amazing how much a brain can heal and develop by just having like that connection with someone.
Rachel, excuse me, I just make a real quick comment. My granddaughter's 29, and this was so very interesting because she's in nurses training now, and she has a backstory, and she laughs now. She says, "Grandma, my frontal lobe is finally developing and getting better," and it really
Huh?
makes so much more sense to me now. Um, but it's amazing. Yes, the kids can, and I see such a difference in her now.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
thank
it's sure to, especially around that like 25-year mark. That's whenever I feel like people come fully online. Um, but the hope is too, a lot of people think that the brain is done developing at 25, and that is not the case. Your brain grows and changes your entire life. So even if someone gets past that point, there's still a lot of good things that can come from it. I'm happy to hear that about your granddaughter. And nursing school too, that is huge. Tell her if she does travel nursing, she can make a lot of money doing that. All right, so we're going to move on to trauma triggers. So triggers are a signal that there is something dangerous in the environment right now based on the individual's past experience with a danger. This shifts us to think from the bottom part or survival part of our brain. Um, an example of a trigger, oh, we have that on the next slide, with this very, very scary picture. That picture is very scary to me. I did not put that in there. Also, I think that's AI. I'm going to take that out. Some common triggers are unexpected change, maybe sensory input. So they don't have enough sensory stimulation, or maybe they're overstimulated. Feeling shame. Shame is a huge trigger for kids. A lot of kiddos who grew up with childhood trauma feel a deep sense of shame. A lot of kids blame themselves for what happened to them and their caregivers. So when you trigger that shame, you make them feel shameful about themselves. It just pokes on a wound that is already open. Physical contact might be a trigger. I have a friend who can't be hugged a certain way on their back because it instantly takes them back to an abuse incident. Um, it might be a reminder of a traumatic event. Some people might be walking by and they smell a stranger that has the same cologne as their abuser, and they are immediately taken back to the time of the event. Sounds, smells, and sights. Sometimes positive attention can be a trigger. Um, a lot of kids maybe learned that negative attention, whether even though it's not safe, it's familiar. And positive attention is unfamiliar. The funny thing with the brain is that it will take the familiar thing over the unfamiliar thing. I don't know if you remember or have heard of the phrase, better, what is it? Better the hell you know than the heaven you don't. Um, Brains will interpret often things that are unfamiliar as threatening. And so that's why you get people say, like, who are in domestic violence situations, stay with their abuser, because they understand that, hey, I'm miserable, but at least I know I can survive this. But I don't know if I can survive being apart from them. And the unknown is so much more scary than the known. So positive attention, because it might be unknown to a child, ooh, that's scary. I have no experience with that. We're going to shut that down. Very interesting stuff. So if you have a kiddo who reacts negatively to positive attention, that doesn't mean to stop giving it. Keep giving that positive attention, because over time, their brain's going to learn, oh, this is safe, actually. All healing the brain is reinforcement again and again and again. I like to think of it as like, we're very familiar with this right now with the snow, right? So when you're shoveling a path in the snow and it takes just a scoop and a scoop and a scoop, that's what positive reinforcement is. You're taking your shovel and you're scooping a new path towards safety for them. And then also a lack of control or power. When abuse happens, kids feel in control. And so if they feel like they're not controlled again or out of control again, that can be a trigger for them. Let's get away from that really scary slide. Okay, let me check my time. This video is 5 minutes. Okay, we have time. So we're going to switch gears and talk about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And these are potentially traumatic events that can have negative lasting effects on health and well-being. So in 1998, the Center for Disease Control at Kaiser Permanente completed a study of over 17,000 middle-class Americans to determine if childhood experiences had any effects on their physical and mental health as they became adults. They conducted the study through a survey of 10 questions, as well as looking through medical records of the participants. The study proved a significant and very alarming correlation between adverse childhood experiences and adult mental and physical health. Nearly 60% of adults with physical or mental health issues reported having adverse childhood experiences. So we understand there's a correlation between bad childhood experiences and your physical and mental health later on in life. So this video explains the ACEs study and the astonishing results that came from it. So I'm going to go ahead and play it.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
All right. A little bit of palate cleanser if you want to see my assistant. My assistant is joining us today. This is Kit. She says hello. She'll probably be on my lap the rest of this. She always likes to make an appearance during a heavy video. But that is the ACEs study. I remember whenever I first learned about ACEs years and years and years ago, I found it so profound. When you don't work in the trauma field, I think the folks who do work in the trauma field forget that most folks don't know that the brain and body are intertwined. So if something happens emotionally to you when you're a child, even if you don't have physical scars that happen to it, you have your mental scars, your emotional scars. The brain and body are connected. So even if you only experience something emotional as a child, it impacts and carries over into your adulthood. So much so that it can cause physiological issues, that it can cause substance abuse issues, it can cause behavioral and emotional issues as well. It is just profound that something that can happen to us years and years and decades ago can still have impacts on our brains and bodies as well. On the flip side, it is also encouraging that decades and decades of positive reinforcement can undo the damage that was caused by the damages of childhood. So this chart, going into it a little bit more, this chart shows 3 different types of ACEs, like what we went over in the video. But just to reiterate, there's abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Any one or combination of these ACEs experienced in childhood correlates to a higher rate of physical and mental health problems in adulthood, like we said. It also correlates to higher risky behavior seen in children and adolescents, including teen pregnancies, suicide, sexual activity, and drug and alcohol use. Studies show that if you experience just one ACE in your childhood, there is an 80% likelihood of an exposure to another. I do want to make a point that some children can have adverse childhood experiences and it does not affect them into adulthood. The reason for this is that these children usually have protective factors in their life that balance out the adverse childhood experiences. So for an example, my my friend has a friend who she at a very young age grew up with an unstable mom and dad wasn't around. Mom had substance abuse issues. However, from a very young age, mom entrusted her parents, so my friend's grandparents, to care for her and watch over her. So most of my friend's earliest memories are of a stable home with her grandparents. She does deal with some anxiety, but she has built a healthy life for herself, thriving social life, beautiful career, great coping mechanisms. All of this is because, yes, she had adverse childhood experiences of mother with substance abuse issues, mother with mental health issues, emotional neglect from mom, things like that. However, she was entrusted with the care of a safe and stable, loving home, and that balanced out the ACEs that she experienced as a child. Also, going back on stress and the good stress and the bad stress, while some stress in life is normal, the type of stress that results when a child experiences ACEs might become toxic when there's a strong, frequent, or prolonged amount of it in the absence of a protective, supportive adult relationship. When children have at least one adult relationship where they feel safe and supported, and this can be you guys, this can negate the impact of those experiences. Like I said, you can be that one supportive relationship that makes a child more resilient in their traumatic experiences. Even if you only have that child for a brief moment, the positive adult example is such a lasting impact on a kid, even more than you know. Even if you think they're going to forget you, and maybe they'll forget your name, but they won't forget the kindness that you treated them with. I'm going to skip this video for the sake of time, because let me see how long it is. Yeah, so this is a good video. If we have time at the end, we will watch it. I will say this video is heavy. This is a very heavy video. It is about a little girl and her brother that get put into temporary custody, into temporary foster care, and her journey with that. It is very dramatic. I find it a little triggering. So we're going to skip it and might watch it if we have time at the end. Okay. So how do we deal with these issues that we see arise in a child or even an adult that has these negative behaviors that come from having adverse childhood experiences? Folks tend to, with my clients, and I would see with my clients and friends and family, a lot of folks have blamed and shamed the person. Might have told them, well, if you didn't do this, you would have been in that situation. I see this a lot with my domestic violence clients. Well, if you just didn't get with him, well, if you just didn't stay with him, if you didn't accept his behavior. I am also a survivor of this, and one thing that I got often was, I would never let a man treat me that way. I never let a man treat me that way. You don't know until you're in that situation, right? So you can blame, you can shame. Not you guys. You guys would never do that. This group, you guys are all angels, and you guys would never do any of these. People can punish, isolate, or restrain that person. This is often seen in schools. So disrupting behavior is often punished with the removal of a child or the restraint of a child. I've seen people, just be silent and ignore. So often folks don't talk about the traumas we know a person has experienced because the topic can be extremely uncomfortable and hard to talk about. I have noticed this throughout my life. I'm often a person who is unfazed by talking about the hard things in life and traumatic experiences. And it's always so amazing to me to meet a person, an acquaintance, and how easily they open up to me and how easily I can hear the deepest, darkest parts of the things that they've gone through, because they can see that I genuinely care and I don't feel discomforted, and I ask the questions that folks tend to not ask the people who've been through these things. Silence, we might think we're protecting a person. We might think, oh, they're just going to be so uncomfortable to talk about this, so I'm just going to ignore it. I'm just going to push it down. I don't want to make them uncomfortable. You'd be surprised how often people are just so desperate to talk about the things that they went through. Even when I would work at the coffee shop, sometimes I feel like I'd be working a bar, as someone would tell me, you know, just all the things that they had been through, just because they had a listening ear. Finally they had a listening ear from someone. So being silent, ignoring these things is way less helpful than folks think. Another thing that we maybe don't think about is pity, sympathy, or charity. So thinking, if we could just cover a family's groceries for the month or rent for the month, then all their problems will be solved and they should be so grateful and they won't have these mental health issues anymore. One thing that I would get, having a background like with childhood trauma, is just like, oh, you poor thing, look at all you went through. It makes you feel fragile. It makes you feel like you're not strong for going through the things that you went through. And when you haven't experienced the hard things that someone has been through, it's got to be really hard to not do this pity, to do this sympathy. I don't know how that is, just because I've experienced what I've experienced, but I think the way to approach it is by empathy, by trying to feel what the other person's feeling. Take a minute and close your eyes and walk a mile in their shoes and tell them, instead of saying, oh, you poor thing, you've really been through it, like, wow, you are so strong for going through what you're going through. Like, I have such admiration for you. That feels so much better and so much like more self-empowering than, oh, you poor little thing, look at all you've been through. I've been on the receiving end of both of those. I can tell you that the empowering one feels so much more, just feels so much better. And then also trying to fix someone. Telling people, you just need to get on medicine. You just need to get on medication. Medication is good. And there are people who do need to get on medication, but that is not the only fix. There are so many other things. Also trying to fix, I would see this a lot in relationships. Maybe I had a client that was dating someone with severe mental health issues, and they think, if only I can just love them enough, then they won't have mental health issues anymore. And that's not the case. You can't fix somebody, you can't fix anyone. You can only support someone as they work on themselves. That is the only way anyone can heal, is if they take charge of their own healing. And then you can just be that supportive person that's cheering them on, rooting them, but you can't fix anything for anyone. You can just support them. So while we're always approaching handling these situations with good intentions, if we don't do this in the correct way, that sees a person as a whole person with agency, with power that they have themselves, we can often end up re-traumatizing that person. It's important to remember that the only thing we can do when someone is traumatized is to support them. Like I said, not try and fix them. Often what we would describe as the problem actually might be that person's ability to cope with the trauma and express themselves. This is a thing like substance abuse issues. Yes, a substance might be an issue. Someone might use alcohol to cope. However, when you take away that coping mechanism, when you ban that person from drinking alcohol, when you shame them for it, you take away their only coping mechanism and giving them nothing. So it's like taking the support beams out from a house and expecting the roof to stay up. They have to have other supports built in place in order for that successful taking away of that unhealthy coping mechanisms, because it might not be holding the roof up well, but it is holding the roof up. Something to think about. In order to actually help, we have to actually deal with the problem at hand, not the surface coping mechanism, but the trauma that they're dealing with themselves. We need to move our thinking from what is wrong with you, how can I fix you, to what happened to you and how can we support you. Like I said, what's often described as a problem, like behavior, like bad behavior, addiction, physical symptoms, etc., is the person's only ability to cope with the trauma. If you take that problem away without helping the person deal with the underlying trauma, you often only make things worse. This is one way that people are re-traumatized. If you, sorry, I was going ahead of my notes. Awesome. So we still have time. Still have time. And then here's a little quote from Brene Brown. Empathy has no scripts. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating that incredibly healing message of you are not alone. That is what it all comes down to. It's just telling this person, oh, not you poor thing. I can't imagine all that you've been through. Just, hey, I'm here. You're strong, and you are not alone because I'm here now. That is what someone needs to hear. Oh, this is such a good video. So this is a very short but powerful video that breaks down the difference between sympathy and empathy and why it's important to practice empathy when working with your clients instead of just expressing sympathy for their situations. And then we're gonna start wrapping things up.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Yeah, so it's so simple and short, but I think it's got such a nice little message of like what empathy truly is and why that's different from sympathy. Just at the end of the day, empathy is about creating connections and connecting with someone, and sympathy is creating a distance between someone. Gosh, I have no idea what you're even going through. I can't relate to that at all. I'm sure if you search deep inside yourself, you can relate to somebody, even if they've been through a traumatic experience and you haven't. You felt sadness before, you felt overwhelmed before, you felt alone before. Tapping into that side of it, you don't have to have the exact same experiences as someone to be able to empathize with them. So how does this impact your work? So we're briefly going to talk about, way too briefly talk about secondary trauma. Secondary trauma is something that not a lot of people know about. So secondary traumatic stress is the emotional duress or stress, emotional stress that results when an individual hears about the first-hand trauma experiences of another, and it mimics the symptoms of PTSD. So Secondary trauma happens not when you go through the traumatic event, it's when you hear someone you care about, or just, I guess, anyone, when you hear about someone going through a traumatic event. I know this happens to a lot of direct service professionals, and this has probably, if you guys have been an advocate for a while, has probably happened to you at some point. And these things can mimic the symptoms of PTSD. The related conditions of this are called compassion fatigue, where you've been so compassionate for so long and you care so much and your heart is so full of the pain of the world that you become numb to it, where you stop caring about it because your body can't handle any more dysregulation. You might experience burnout, where the work that you so love to do now fills you with no joy because you feel overwhelmed by it. And then vicarious trauma. So maybe you didn't experience a domestic violence incident. Maybe you didn't experience a sexual assault, but then someone told their story to you and it was so deeply disturbing to you that it impacts you deeply. Humans are made to connect, and it is very normal for you to connect to a story that even you didn't experience. You can see changes in your beliefs about yourself, others, the world around you. You might start seeing the world as a scary and dangerous place, and sometimes it really is. But you might forget the fact that there's also beautiful things in the world and people to connect with in the world too. You might lose your sense of trust in yourself and others, lose your self-esteem. That, like I said, that perception of safety, it might impact your ability to feel connected with other people because maybe you've connected so much you just can't connect anymore. And it can impact your sense of control. And as we know, a loss of control feels very traumatic for a human brain. So hearing the hard stories that you guys do, doing the work that you do, keep checking in with your body and how it feels to you, and care for yourself in whatever way you can, and connect with people, because the work that you do is incredibly hard and the stories that you hear are incredibly hard, and you guys most of all are at risk of developing these things. So definitely don't feel bad if you feel that way. There's literally a whole term for it called secondary trauma, of what you're experiencing, and your experiences are valid even if you're not the child that is going through what they're going through. A little quote. So this training, I did not develop this training. I love this training. I think it's so good. But the secondary trauma is like, boop, we talk about secondary trauma, and then like, boop, we're back out of it again. So we're booping right back out of it. We will have time for questions, though, if you have more questions about secondary trauma. And we have a whole training on it, by the way. So, Bruce Perry, the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely they'll be able to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. So moving on, how do we move from fixing to supporting our clients or our kiddos who have experienced trauma? We help them by showing up, by building resilience, by being that good example and that person they can depend on again and again and again. So if you look at this picture, it's a visual representation of how resilience works in children. On one end of the scale, you have all the positive skills and protective factors, and on the other end is the negative experiences and risk factors in a child's life. Resiliency is the ability for the skill to tip towards the positive outcomes in a child's life, even though the child does have some negative experiences. The single most important thing to remember is that it only takes one supportive, stable, caring relationship in a child's life to build resiliency and provide a buffer from the negative impacts of trauma. This allows the child to form a healthy relationship, a template for a healthy relationship, and begin to trust adults and have positive experiences in their life that will help them navigate situations to adulthood. And like I said, notice how on these scales, let me see if this is right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice how even though it is the same amount, there's 6 negative outcomes on this side, there's 6 positive outcomes on this side, how it still weighs down to the positive. The positive always weighs more than a negative in a human brain, as long as the positive is connecting with another human that heals the brain in such a crazy way. Okay. We're going to skip this one because I think this is more for social workers. Okay, so wrap up. So it's important to remember that trauma is, like I said, not the event itself, but a reaction to an external event. The 3 E's of trauma are the event, the experience, and the effect. Experiencing repeated complex trauma in the early years of childhood impacts brain development, and most important, being that one stable, committed adult in a child's life is the key to building resiliency. So let's look at our time. Ooh, we got 10 minutes. I did it. Do we have questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'll just make a comment real quick going off of that, like building the relationship, or like being that stable person for a child. I know sometimes like we may only be in a child's life for a year, or sometimes cases are even less than that. I mean, most often they're more than that. But even if you're only, appointed to a child for a year or so, you can still make that impact. And what somebody explained to me one time is that even if, you're not the person that they, stay in contact with for the rest of their life and go back to and are continual support, like you may not even realize the change that you can make for that child. Like maybe you're appointed to them for a year and then you're not in their life anymore, but you built that great connection with them and you showed them that it is possible to connect with somebody and build trust. And so whenever somebody else comes into their life, long term, instead of immediately shutting them off, they, their brain learned, oh, I made a connection with that one person and they didn't, they didn't fail me, or they didn't, they didn't turn out, I don't know. If you have that good positive experience with them, that just teaches them that they can have positive experiences with other people. So just always remember that you never really know the full impact that you make as well. And that's why our work is so important, getting to be that one stable person. Obviously, we don't want to be the only stable person in their life, but if we can be at least one of the stable people in their lives, that's great. So just wanted to add that.
One of the things I like to say that like piggybacks off of that is that this works for anybody. So I want you guys to think really quick that someone asked this question in one of a training that I took, and I thought like that's so impactful. I want you guys to think about who is your favorite teacher growing up. Do you guys have someone in mind? I'm seeing head shakes. Does that teacher even know that you're thinking about them? They're the first person that you think about. You think that teacher even knows? A lot of times those teachers don't. They have no idea that when you think of who is your favorite teacher, that is the person who pops up in your mind. And that is the impact that one person can have. You probably had that teacher for 1 year and you still remember them all these years later. So that's how it can be with you guys too. You can be one of the favorite people that these kids have ever met, and maybe you've only seen them for a short amount of time. So that is a lasting impact that you can have on a kid.
There was a question in the chat from Ashley.
See that.
She said this was come from a little while ago, but you mentioned how ADHD and a child distracted from trauma can resemble one another. So as advocates, are there certain things that we should watch for to differentiate from ADHD from a trauma response?
I think it's not something that you have to necessarily worry about as an advocate, just because you're not the person who's treating that condition. Your job is to just support that child in whatever best way that they can. And ADHD is honestly traumatic in this situation in the society anyway. The society is not built for ADHD. So I think you guys, the fact that you're not treating professionals, I wouldn't worry about differentiating. Is this ADHD? Is this trauma? Yeah, that's not something I would particularly concern myself with. One of the tells, though, whenever you're like a prescribing professional, is that if you prescribe ADHD medicine to a kiddo who does not have ADHD, you're going to see way different effects than if they actually did have the condition. So that's just like one way you can differentiate. Other than that, it's really hard to tell sometimes without looking into their brain and seeing their brain chemistry and neurology.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you guys for giving us some of your time, and make sure to log this in Optima. If you have questions about how to do that, you can email me or Jen, and we can walk you through that. But thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe and warm.